because we just don't know enough. We know some things it does, other things we don't know how it does it, just that it does do it. But it's also far more complex than any machine man has ever made, so that makes it a little difficult as well, and very, very specific, which makes it mathematically impossible to get. But somehow they extract dissolved silicon dioxide. Now, the second most abundant element in the crust of the Earth is silicon, and this is silicon dioxide with a couple of oxygen atoms bonded to it. And that is the main mineral component of something we're all familiar with, glass. But man is not the first one to figure out how to make glass. God made glass first, and he made it clear first. We didn't figure out how to make it clear until about the time of the Renaissance. That's why Paul says we see now through a glass darkly or dimly, because glass back then was always kind of foggy and opaque. They didn't know how to make it clear. But God knew how to make it with these single-celled algae, and so they extract the dissolved silica, solidify it by a process we don't know yet how they do it, and make these beautiful glass greenhouses that they live in temporarily. So here we have a glass house. Man has not made, something new here. God thought of it first. It's really an interesting concept, if you want to pull the curtains for privacy, you have that. But if you live in a rural area where there's nobody around, you can pull back all the curtains, have a really panoramic view. But this is not something man thought of first. God did it first. And here we have a work of art made out of colored glass. It looks like a starfish, but it's actually a glass ornament. But even this is not something man did first. God did it first with the diatoms. This is God's glass starfish. This is magnified somewhere between 400 to 500 times. As you'll see out there, when you look on the microscope slide, it looks just like fine dust. You cannot distinguish at all what they are. And when they're in water, they're even harder to distinguish. But they claim that if you take a quart jar and skim off the surface of the ocean, you have usually nearly 1 million diatoms in that 1 quart of water. But again, they're microscopic, so you can't see them, but they do play a very important role. Now, the amazing thing about diatoms is that there's well over 100,000 distinct kinds, and we keep finding new ones every year. And they just exhibit such geometry and architecture and perfection. I remember I had a pastor friend who was himself an accomplished artist, and when he first looked at these, he said, "Did an artist paint these at a microscopic scale?" And I said, "Well, it is the work of an artist, but not a human artist. Our artist put it in the DNA, all the structural design and blueprint, including the amazing structural color. These do not have color like we normally find in living creatures. That's done by certain selectively reflective molecules called pigmentation molecules, and they'll absorb all the frequencies except for one particular one, and they'll reflect that very brightly, or they can reflect more than one, depending on what kind of molecules you have there. But this is actual glass that is structurally oriented to disperse light like a prism. And you'll see this. This is something you don't see in these slides. This is illuminated from beneath, and they look beautiful. But I've got a lot of high-intensity flashlights out there that if you look at them from the side and all around like that and underneath, you'll see they are indeed made out of glass, and you get that prismatic effect. You can very much tell that they are glass jewels. Now here we have the great English island there, the North Sea. At the bottom, we have the English Channel. And you can see on the lower left end of the island of England there, we have a kind of a light bluish color in the water. That is what we call a diatom bloom. It's called a bloom because they are plants, and so they bloom, so to speak. When the conditions become correct, especially if there's enough dissolved silica, which is what they make their glass greenhouses out of, if there's enough dissolved silica that, say, washes into the ocean after a big storm, rainstorm or something like that, then the basic building block that they have to make their glass houses is readily available. And so you'll see this big bloom that you can actually see in satellite photography from, way out in space, geo-orbiting satellite about 22,000 miles out. You can send her down on the thing. But this explains how we can get so much of it so rapidly if the conditions are right. We get these big blooms where there are quadrillions of those just in this one cloud in the water. But during the flood, we would have the greatest amount of dissolved silica in the ocean ever in world history. And that means these creatures would explosively reproduce. We know that they can, under the right conditions like this, they can double every 24 hours. So all of this, Next day, twice as big. Next day after that, twice as big as that big number. Then twice as big as that big number. And they keep on going until they run out of sufficient silica, which during the flood would be hard to do because there'd be an awful lot of dissolved silica under those conditions like we never have today. And that's why we find in the fossil record layers of this white material called diatomaceous earth. It's actually the exoskeletons, these glass skeletons of the diatoms that explosively bloomed because the conditions were right, lived, had an absolute exponential increase, but they only live for a week and then they die. So they grow and increase, their descendants keep increasing, they die, they fall down to the bottom, they get covered with sediments during the flood, and we actually mine these things out of the earth because of that. Here in the United States, one of the best known sources is near Lompoc, California. If you ever get down there, you can see some of the diatomaceous earth mining projects. Now here's a microscopic view of what diatomaceous earth looks like. It's almost exclusively diatoms with some sand and silica and other things in there, but some of them are complete, some are broken. And because they're broken, like broken glass can be sharp, it can be used as a mild abrasive. And in fact, it's been used clear since the 1850s with this particular brand of toothpaste as a kind of a tooth polish. Now your tooth enamel on the Mohs hardness scale is about 5, whereas glass is about 6 to 6.5. So it's harder than your enamel, so you don't want to do it too often lest you wear down your enamel. They didn't know that back in 1850, I guess. But anyway, it does work very good as a polish for metal because it'll even polish steel. Steel is about 5.5 on the Mohs scale, and this is 6 to 6.5. So it's harder than steel, maybe not as tensile strong as steel, but certainly harder than steel. Also, diatomaceous earth is used, in this case, it's a food grade, purified diatomaceous earth, and it's used for people who have a lack of silica. Again, silicon is the second most abundant element in the crust of the earth. The first one is oxygen, and silicon dioxide is a combination of the both, silicon with 2 oxygen atoms bonded to it, which makes glass. But it's a way of supplementing that if you're low on silica in your diet. Also, it can be used because they have all these sharp little shards at the microscopic scale. It will cut up and destroy intestinal parasites. So some people eat it for that. Others claim it has other health benefits with digestion and everything. So people have used it that way without knowing what in the world it was that they were eating. And it's also used as a crawling insect killer. Now, it's not poisonous, and that's why some people prefer to use it in their homes rather than insecticide. You put little bits of it around where you think cockroaches and other things might be walking, and as they walk through it, these tiny little microscopic sharp shards cut into their exoskeleton, and then it dries them out because it has a desiccating effect of drying them out. So it doesn't kill them instantly or virtually instantly like an insecticide, but it will kill them over a period of days. Now then, it's also used, and most people are familiar with it for this purpose, for filter media, for your swimming pool or for your hot tub. And because, as you saw, they have many little pores and holes in them, so they're like microfilters. And you put this in a canister and you have a super effective microfilter for your pool or your spa. Yet most people, when they use it, they just know it's called diatomite or diatomaceous earth. They don't realize that at the microscopic scale, it's some of God's most beautiful jewels. And they can be seen, as we shall see tonight. And nobody looks at these. Young people especially, some look at this and say, well, this looks too perfect. This must be AI computer-generated imagery. These things aren't real. And I say, well, that's why I bring the microscopes and the slides. You can see for yourself, this is real. And it is real design and real gratuitous beauty. Now, gratuitous beauty is found throughout the world that God created because he's not just the great engineer, he's also the great artist. Yeah, because we're made in the image of God, we have an appreciation of aestheticism. It's in our being because we're made in his image. And so God puts his artistic flair into things where it's not necessary. That's why it's called gratuitous beauty. You don't need it to survive. There's plenty of algae that survives without having a glass greenhouse, okay? So why do we need it? And even if it was necessary, why do you need this huge variety in the different color and the perfect geometric forms and the architecture and the refraction of light that it brings like jewels do? I mean, it's not necessary for survival, but it's there. And I think creation explains that a whole lot better than evolution, which is just based on survival of the fittest. Now, in addition to the phytoplankton, or in other words, single-celled plankton that are plants, algae, we have single-celled creatures that are more like amoebas, but they also extract the silicon dioxide, silica, out of the ocean water. And these are found not just in the ocean, they're found in lakes and streams. Some of them are even found in habitually moist earth. They can survive just about anywhere where there's water, but the vast majority of them, of course, are found in the oceans. But the radiolaria don't use photosynthesis, but they do make these beautiful glass houses that they live in. And for some reason, God chose not to give them structural color. They are more like what you'd expect to find in a glass blower's shop, where they make all these intricate things out of blown glass. And they, you can see that they glisten in the light, but they don't really refract into the rainbow spectrum of the light. For some reason, God chose not to do that. But they still look remarkably beautiful in their own right, and they are amazing examples of design and beauty, something that makes perfect sense in a created world. Now, here we have actually, drawings of, I forgot to bring my water up. Maybe somebody could grab that for me. These are actual drawings of some of the radiolaria that went extinct, probably at the time of the flood. Thank you. The change in temperature, change in pH, and other chemistry was, ones that weren't hardy enough went extinct. They died, and they got buried in sediment, which is where we find some of these in sediment. We also find them scraped up off the sediments on the bottom of the ocean, but they don't exist today anymore. So there was even greater and richer variety in the past than what we have today. Now, these are just marvelous, and you look in the upper left-hand corner, it looks kind of like a hot air balloon. One next to it looks like an elaborate bird feeder. One in the middle looks like a chandelier. The two on the end, I don't know what they look like, but they sure don't look like they happened by a bunch of blind random mistakes in the DNA that produced it. The three in the center look like miniature microscopic gazebos, but, God has his artistic flair for sure. And we find them looking just so superb, as if they were the most delicate and beautiful artistry put into glass ornaments. I mean, if you found these on a high-class Christmas tree, they would not look out of place. In fact, they would outclass most any other ornaments that you could find. But these exist at the microscopic level. These were drawn by the famous scientist and philosopher and accomplished artist in his own right, Ernst Haeckel. He was around during the late 1800s and into the early 1900s. But, if you had these on your Christmas tree and someone said, man, I love those. I've never seen anything so beautiful and ornate. I want some for my Christmas tree. Where did you get them? I said, well, there's a glass factory down the road that makes these things, and they have an interesting story. We had that earthquake a while back, and it jostled around all their machines and their computers, and it kind of randomly reprogrammed the blueprints that they had. And when they plugged it in after all that random shuffling, look what popped out. Even better designs than we ever had before. Nobody would believe that for good reason, because random accidents don't produce things better, they make things worse. But these are so exquisite, and all of this perfection, all of this symmetry, all of this architecture is encapsulated in a code, a blueprint code in the DNA that tells that little single-cell creature what to do with that glass that it extracts out of the seawater. So here we have one that's illustrated in other ornate ones that, again, are extinct, no longer available, but we have found their fossil glass skeletons, and the little pink objects inside of them are the single-celled animals. That's why these are called zooplankton instead of phytoplankton. Phytoplankton, like algae, are photosynthetic. These are just animals like amoebas, single-celled animals, that extract nutrient particles and feed on other dead microorganisms in the ocean. And they're at the bottom of the food chain for, again, very important for the ocean ecology. But because man is made in the image of God and loves all this beautiful artistry, he often copies these. He can't improve on them, so he just plain copy them, make them into pendants. Here we have certain containers and conversation pieces based on radiolarian designs. Here we have a radiolarian in the upper left-hand corner that was used as the basis for this chalice and these decanters. This one was so perfect, the artist said, I can't improve on it. I'll just copy it by putting it into aluminum and bringing it up to the macroscopic scale. We see this often also with wrought iron. Unless you have a microscope, you can't see it. But if the artist reconstructs it at a large scale, you can see it without a microscope. Yeah, this one was used for the inspiration for pavilion that was done at the Paris Exposition in the year 1900, World Exposition, later they called them World's Fairs, but you can obviously see the influence on the design of the pavilion from the Radiolarian. This one was so beautiful, the artist said, I'll just copy it and I'll put it in colored bronze. And glass blowers often copy them. They say the originals are made in glass, but they're too tiny to see, so we'll blow them, replicas of them in glass, so that people can see them at the macroscopic scale. And because they're just so wonderfully beautiful, people, of course, put them on their t-shirts, a popular thing today. But I think in their purest form, they are appreciated, as they will be out here with my microscopes, by just putting them on the microscopic slide and looking at them, using the dials to move through and look at them one at a time. Now, you can get these, if you happen to have a good quality microscope, you can get these from diatomshop.com, as it says there, and they are actually arranged, in this case, arranged in the form of a Victorian-style cross. But these can be rather expensive. That takes a lot of work, a lot of dedication, a lot of special microscopic tools and skill to do this. So there is some work that goes into it, but I have found that they generally run about $400 or $500 or more per slide. They have multiple ones on the slides, but that is quite a bit to pay. So the ones I got out there, I think the most I paid for one was $87, and I did that by bidding on eBay on antique diatoms that are arranged. And they are coming from the late 1800s up to the early 1900s. And they're old, but they still look beautiful. And you can get them for much less than you get these brand new ones that do cost quite a bit. So man, because he loves beauty, because why? Well, you don't need beauty to survive. You know, if you're in a jail cell, there's no pictures on the wall. You might not even have a window to look out and see the trees, but you can survive. You don't need beauty to survive, but it feeds the soul, because being made in the image of God, we love beautiful things. And when we see beautiful things like this, we want to improve it. We want to add to it, kind of put them together to make even more complex, beautiful forms of artistic expression. So we find that God was the first one to make glass. He was the first one to make clear glass. He was the first one to make houses out of glass. And he was certainly the first one to make artwork out of glass. And he did this all with the diatoms and the radiolaria. Now, how do the evolutionists explain this? Well, they really don't. They just close their minds. For example, here we have Sir Francis Crick of the famous Watson and Crick team that got the Nobel Prize for elucidating the correct double helical structure of DNA. That was back in the 50s when they did that. But he said biologists must constantly keep in mind that what they see was not designed, but rather evolved. I mean, is that an open scientific approach? Not hardly. I mean, what if you say, we're going to go on a field trip out here, you know, and we're going to look at this formation on a rock, and they take you out to Mount Rushmore, and they say, now, the first thing we got to tell you before you do your report is that only naturalistic processes can be used to explain what you see. Those 4 presidents' heads, recognizable, carved into granite, was not by intelligent, purposeful design. No, you can say it was the wind, you can say it was the rain and erosion, you can say it was squirrels burrowing into the rocks, whatever you want that's a natural explanation, we will not accept an intelligent design explanation. And that's what they've done. They've closed their minds, and then they wonder why they can't see it. But the evidence is all around us. The Bible says so. In fact, in nature, we do see things that can be explained by natural forces. For example, all of us have gone to the beach at one time and you see a sand dune with these parallel ridges. That's simply the wind blowing constantly in the same direction. It produces these ridges. It's a natural design, a natural pattern, certainly not a very complex design, but you could explain that without intelligence of man, and you could explain it without the supernatural power of God. It's just the wind blowing. However, there are other designs you can't do that with. Here we have a message inscribed in the sand with exactly the right English alphabet letters and the right words in the right order to modify one another to carry a specific message. That takes authorship. That takes intelligent design. And there's nothing natural there that would do that. Would the wind produce this? No, but it would certainly erase it. Would the surf and the waves produce this? No, but it would obliterate it. Would a lightning strike produce it? No, but it would obliterate it. You know, you can't think of anything. The Earth's magnetic field, is there anything we've ever observed capable of doing this as opposed to just parallel lines in the sand? Well, some things are naturally produced, others are supernatural. This message is evidence of supernatural design because it's above what nature can do. So we have natural design and we have supernatural design, but it's not superhuman. It's supernatural, but not superhuman. We, being made in the image of God, having intelligence, can write information. We could write the whole Gettysburg Address on the sand of the beach if we wanted to. It wouldn't last long because the wind, high tide would come and erase it, but we could do it temporarily. But it's something that is not a miracle because it can be done by humans. It's human design, supernatural, but not superhuman. But when we look in the world of biology, as with the diatoms and the radiolaria, we instantly see an area that is beyond human technology, beyond human capability. As the scripture says, with man, this is impossible, but with God, all things are possible. And we can't even begin in the 21st century, if we had a dream team of the best scientists in the world with the trillions of dollars in the World's Bank at their disposal, they could not go into any world-class laboratory and start from scratch with the basic chemical elements, carbon, hydrogen, nitrogen, oxygen, sulfur, etc., and put together from scratch a single living and reproducing cell. They couldn't make these things because we have no idea how they extract the silica and solidify it and make these marvelous structures. If you don't understand how it works, you can't replicate it. And it's mathematically impossible anyway. Even if you had trillions times trillions of years of time and trillions times trillions of universes, the math shows this level of specificity and complexity can't even begin to be obtained even at the rudimentary level. Not even a single average-sized DNA molecule, not a single average-sized protein could be attained by chance in all that time and effort. That's facts, that's science. But as with Sir Francis Crick, no matter what you see, it could not have been designed, it had to have evolved. So that's how Carl Sagan dealt with it. He actually calculated that the odds of getting a single cell by chance was 1 chance in 10 to the 3 millionth power. That is written out longhand as the number 1 with 3 million zeros after it. The total number of stars in the universe is only about 1 with 22 zeros after it, okay? The total number of atoms is somewhere in the range of about 1 with 80 zeros after it. So he looks at this impossibility, 1 with 3 million zeros after it, and says, well, it appears to be mathematically impossible, but we know that can't be true. We have proof that somehow this apparent mathematical impossibility was overcome. How? Because you and I exist, and we know we could not have been created. So the fact that we exist proves that we must have evolved. Now, you don't have to know much about logic to realize that is a logical fallacy. That is known as begging the question or asserting the consequent. And if it works both ways, it's invalid. I could say, well, we do exist, and if we were created, we would exist, therefore we were created. And it would have just as much authority as what he said. The only difference is you can overcome the mathematically impossible by the power of intelligent design. You can do it in seconds to minutes, what could not be achieved mathematically in trillions times trillions of years. That's a mathematical fact. So we see that there is natural design, there is human design, but all around us there is design that had to originate by a power both supernatural and superhuman. Therefore, in the realm of the divine, God's divine fingerprints are all over his creation. And if we'll just listen to it, people won't be saying, well, if God would come down and do a miracle in front of me, then I'd believe. God says, open your eyes. Even at the microscopic level, all over this creation, there's evidence of intelligent design that is supernatural and superhuman. The miracles are there. You just have to open your mind to realize that it's true. And God has said this 2,000 years ago, but it's just as true, in fact, more so today, because we know so much more about how complex life is today and how impossible it would be to achieve it, even with trillions of years and trillions of universes. So for ever since the creation of the world, his invisible nature and attributes, that is, his eternal power and divinity, have been made intelligible and clearly discernible in and through the things that have been made, his handiworks. Tonight we've looked at just some of his amazing handiworks, the diatoms and the radiolaria. So men are without excuse, altogether without any defense or justification. Well, I wanted to get this done quickly tonight, and we did, so we can now go out and look at these firsthand. Now remember, you want to use the flashlights. First, turn on the light so it shines from underneath. That'll give you a different aspect. Then turn off the light and shine the flashlight around the sides and up under the bottom. There's a couple there where you only want it from the bottom, so I'll tell you which ones those are. But you'll see levels of beauty and color that you don't ordinarily see in slides like this. because it's always illuminated from the bottom. When you illuminate it from the side and underneath, you get these different angles of dispersion of color, and then they appear like the beautiful jewels that they really are. So let's go ahead and pray and close, and we'll go out there and do that. Father, we thank you for your truth. Thank you that throughout your creation, you have left your fingerprints, evidence of your supernatural and superhuman design, so that indeed men are without excuse. Help us to take this to heart. Help us to be able to share this with those who are so lost and confused because they've been lied to so much. And help us, Lord, to appreciate you in every aspect of your creation. The heavens, indeed, and all of your creation declares the glory of God. And we give you thanks and praise for that. In Jesus' name, amen.